Good morning. This is a quick start guide for those of you who didn't yet complete the first paper but would like to use a draft version of the first paper as a way to also start the second paper. So let me try to squeeze this all into my screen here. But what I propose that you do is look around in our materials for the first half of the semester and find things that stood out to you as really good examples of what you would tell someone who said, African American culture, what is that class about? How is African American culture different from the rest of American culture? Someone asked you that question, how would you answer it? And part of the goal for how you would answer that is I would like you to use examples from things we have read in the class. So this morning I spoke to one of your classmates who said the film The Apollo was something really important to me in understanding African American culture. So how could you use an example from the Apollo film to start out your paper? Well, when you link to the film, you can look at the transcript of the film, and that can make it easier for you to find the segment within the film, The Apollo, which was an hour and 41 minutes, that tells the story for you, that sets the stage for how you want to describe African American culture. So here, if you remember the tree of hope and the tree that was planted outside the theater, but they cut it down, yet they kept it at the Apollo Theater, and everybody touches it so they can feel like they're kind of connected as a family and to everyone who's ever been on that stage, etc. You can copy and paste that section and put it at the beginning of your paper. Then think about answering all of these possible questions to explain to someone, well, here's an example of what African American culture is. The Apollo Theater, and specifically that tree stump they have on the stage, really tells us how African American culture is different from mainstream American culture or the master narrative of American culture. So you'd have to think about these questions and possibly others to start off your paper. Also, and this is another option, I don't mean to do this too, within the Apollo they talk about hip-hop, and hip-hop bringing expression and a way to fight the power and black culture to the world, but there wasn't a stage for hip-hop before the, other than the Apollo. And eventually the world recognized hip-hop, but it started in places like the Apollo for largely black audiences. Another option you might think about is the Theme for English B by Langston Hughes, because that poem itself is about learning, and I started with that because I wanted you to think about what was going to happen in this class. So we did this virtual Quaker reading Padlet in week 1, if you remember, and you all chose these lines that you really liked from Hughes' Theme for English B. Now keep in mind, if you want to use the Apollo or Theme for English B, you can choose any lines that you want. But I have another example of how you might use that for your paper to explain African American culture. And this is what I love, part of what I love about the poem, some of my favorite lines too, that Hannah and a few others posted. As I learned from you, I guess you learned from me, although you're older and white and somewhat more free. I, as a white American, have privileges and a worldview and a perspective that fits into a master narrative and makes it easy for me to ignore people who might get disenfranchised or not have my privileges. But African American culture can struggle through possible disadvantages, but more importantly, teach people like me that there are other ways of being, other strategies, other goals that we could have. So Hughes says he likes old white guys, but he likes other stuff too. He likes Bessie Smith. What is different about blues culture, African American culture, that challenges the master narrative? And the last example here that I pulled is from yet another text that we all looked at pretty early in the semester in January, and that is Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb. And I picked one quote, but you can pick practically anything out of here if you want to give a description of how it describes African American culture specifically, and the possibility and the potential that African American culture can bring to the United States. And so we don't just have a master narrative that's exclusive, that we can understand each other and move forward. So I'll upload this document that has examples of 4 different choices you might draw from. However, there's pretty endless options, and maybe I'll even add a few more just to give you examples. When you have those, you use those to explain in your paper what African American culture is.